freedom of speech,
fundamental rights,
freedom of conscience,
academic freedom,
freedom of press,
and the right to listen.
You're listening to So to Speak, the free speech podcast, brought to you by FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. Killer Mike, thanks for being here today.
Man, thanks for having me.
Have you done an interview in tuxedos before?
Maybe prom, yeah. It's been a while.
Well, thanks for coming. What made you interested in free speech issues? Is this something you grew up with, or is it something you came to appreciate as you got older?
It's my grandfather and a teacher named Mrs. Ellison, who was, her classroom was a dictatorship, but she taught me to love the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, because not only was she a very good teacher in terms of helping you understand the three levels of government, helping you understand the delicate balance that this republic holds in terms of recognizing the rights. You're born with the right for free speech. This government simply recognizes that right and makes it law that you have that right. But you're born with that right, and she made me understand that inalienable means nothing supersedes that. My grandfather was a black man, a Southerner, someone who probably was more libertarian in his values.
I remember you saying that.
When I think about it, because, his thoughts was, if God gave you an appetite and a mind to make a fishing pole, you shouldn't have to wait on the law to give you permission to fish. And my grandmother, who was a great debate opposite for him, said, well, if you didn't pay taxes for a fishing license, there wouldn't be anyone to come clean up the parks. And, my grandfather and grandmother provided lively debate and helped me understand that if engaged with love and respect for the commonality and for the reverence of being able to say stuff freely, they helped me understand that you can engage with people who didn't necessarily agree with you in a loving and respectful way. And I think that this country and its ambition to be a more perfect union is worthy enough for me to participate in making sure that everyone, even those I don't agree with, have freedom of speech.
Yeah, it's very much a part of your career that you're willing to talk across lines of difference, right? You're a Bernie Sanders supporter who is willing to meet with Georgia Governor Brian Kemp.
Absolutely.
And so in our age of hyper-polarized politics, why do you think that's important? Because there's a strain in activism right now, particularly with my generation and younger generations, where you don't talk to the person on the other side. There's this tendency to vilify people who you disagree with.
Yeah.
So
that's in my very frank opinion, that's a very white middle class way of handling shit. Just to be honest, black people haven't had that choice. We've had to continuously talk across the table to people who did not agree with us. Lincoln, who celebrated in this country as a unifier, was willing to let slavery exist if it would have kept the Union together, but it would not have. So therefore, he had to take the side of the cause that keeping the country together, which by proxy got rid of slavery, because slavery was in Cornerstone, based on Alexander Stephens' speech, the Cornerstone speech, built on slavery. So I don't have a choice but to engage with those that disagree with me, because that's the only thing that's ever been effective for me. And I think that Americans need to understand that in whole, all the people that started this country, the people that are credited as founding fathers, the people who had the ambition of being a more perfect union, they got in a room at some point and they argued like shit. And they understood that this republic could not be like the monarchy that it had left and broke away from, that it could not tax others without fair representation. But greater than that, what you had to have was the opportunity for people to speak their truth in their mind. Did not mean their truth was right, did not mean their mind was always right in thinking, but it meant that at least I know, like my grandfather would say, who my enemy was when I walked in the room. So I've never had a fear of people or who disagree with me or being disagreed with. I have a fear when people go quiet, because when people go quiet where I'm from, night riders come and lynchings happen and Jim Crow happens and essentially apartheid, which my parents were born into. They were over 60 years old, were born into. That's what happens when we get quiet. And the reason I did the joking or the satire about white middle classdom is because in black working class families, you don't have a choice oftentimes not to talk to the person you don't agree with. Your conservative auntie is going to be there, and she's going to tell you she thinks Clarence Thomas should be on the Supreme Court, even if you disagree, right? In white families, if I've seen growing up, sometimes I'll hear people say, I haven't talked to my mother or father in years based on their thinking, or they're still my mother and father. I don't agree with them always, but I'm going to talk to them. My father is much more conservative in his thoughts than I am. Some of the stuff that I say and do on record, shocks the shit out of him, but doesn't mean I'm not his son. He just tells you you're a lot more like your mother than I ever thought you would have been. So I encourage Americans to understand that this republic is not perfect, but in our ambition to become more perfect, We have to do more engagement, not less, because if we become polarized, then we take ourselves back into a place of perpetual civil war, even if just thoughts and action, thoughts and words versus action.
Yeah, there's this great Frederick Douglass quote where he says, "I'll work with all to do right and none to do wrong."
Absolutely.
It really speaks to the power of talking across lines of difference to accomplish things. I mean, if you're just preaching to the choir, you're not changing anything.
It's interesting you say that. Frederick Douglass is the high school I went to. He's a very prominent figure in my life, and he's someone that I'm going to talk about tonight.
Oh, wonderful. He wrote one of my favorite speeches about freedom of speech called A Plea for Free Speech in Boston, which was about he was organizing an abolitionist meeting in the city of Boston, and it was overrun by a pro-slavery mob, and the police did nothing. So he wrote that speech in 1860, which we at FIRE talk about all the time today.
So that speech is a speech I'll be quoting in my speech today.
Oh, wonderful.
I've also read that speech. I also read about that moment and understand how important it is. Never looked at Boston as a beacon of freedom, but it's amazing what
it
you
is
learn
when Frederick
reading.
Douglass is there,
absolutely, right? Absolutely. Just got back from Ireland a few months ago and didn't realize how big of an impact he had there. A cab driver told my wife, "I don't believe in God, but I believe in Martin Luther King. I believe in Malcolm X, Nelson Mandela, and Frederick Douglass."
That's beautiful. So in your music video, Run,
yes.
You have a moment where someone is carrying a flag,
yes.
and it says, "Protect Black Art, Free
yes.
Ghana."
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well,
why you included that?
Well, I included that because bigger than Free Ghana and even Free Thugger, who I'm still advocating for Thugger's freedom, if it's based on lyrics alone that he's being prosecuted. Blacks are often affected first and worst in this country by laws or afterthoughts of laws. When you look at freedom of speech, to rob someone of their humanity and enslave them is to rob them of their God-given right to protest that. At some point, enslaved Africans did not have the right to simply say, "I am free." They did not have the right to name themselves or their children. They did not have the right to push back against any oppressive circumstance they fought. And I think that the reason, if you get a Frederick Douglass, who's an incredible writer and orator, is because he had experienced the depths of slavery. He had experienced the evils of slavery. And he understood that his talk could help lead this country out of that. In music, if you look at a man named Luther Campbell,
oh yeah,
and what he did in the 90s, we call him Uncle Luke now. We look at him as a beloved football coach and kind of like dirty old uncle in the party that'll tell us when our moms and aunties were gyrating at Freaknik. But what he is absolutely one of the greatest patriots this country has ever had.
Oh yeah.
Because as a successful rapper and businessman, he could have chosen to, when charged by Broward County with obscenity, to simply curtail his art at a time where, as the world grew more sexualized, we also got more sexual education because HIV was running rampant. Disease was up. People were getting freer sexually. There needed to be someone you trusted from pop culture to say, use a condom, engage in safe sex. So right after the gyrating and the music, Luke would say things like that, and it helped us. But Broward County wanted to charge him with obscenity. He fought that case and essentially won freedom of speech, not only for me and you to sit here today, but for every musician that came after, be they black, white, or indifferent, whatever color. Now, his main opponent, biggest opponent, was someone whose husband we cheered on, Al Gore. It was Tipper Gore. His wife. Al needed more people from the right to come center because he wanted to be president. His wife engaged on a bullshit campaign to oppress musicians, to say, call out America, say, we're going to call out indecency. It was bullshit then, it's bullshit now, it'll be bullshit 100 years from now. But in his political ambitions, Gore encouraged it. Part of the reason I would never vote for him was because that patriot, Luke, had to pay the price for all of us to make sure that we simply had the right to say beyond, pop that pussy, Black Lives Matter. Free black people. What's happening in politics in South Florida is not, this is all stuff he's done, is not right. It's stuff that he's done post that. And if we don't protect those type of patriots, be they Uncle Luke, be they Larry Flint, be they the kid on Facebook who just got frustrated and wrote something that's now being prosecuted, that gets talked about in the book Rap on Trial, by Andrea Dennis and Eric Nelson. If we do not fight for that right, if we don't pick up locally and act as an Uncle Luke did ourselves, then we'll find ourselves in peril again. And how long before the Italians can't speak again, the Irish can't speak again, the Jewish can't speak again, women can't speak again, and black people can't speak again?
Yeah, in my office, in Fire's DC office, I've got a Luther Campbell poster on my wall, banned in the USA.
I knew I liked you. Frederick Douglass and Luther Campbell within the first 10 minutes of their interview is usually going good.
Oh yeah, Luther Campbell's a hero of mine, and
Absolutely.
Two Live Crew. I mean, what they did in fighting for the right to make their music is one of the important moments in music censorship history. And I wanted to ask you about the book you mentioned, Rap on Trial, for which you wrote the foreword. They're still going after rap music.
Yes, they are.
Eric and Andrea found 500 documented cases of rap artists having their lyrics prosecuted.
Yeah.
And you don't always see this in other genres, right?
Even
Johnny
beyond,
Cash, shot a man in Reno just
to watch him die. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Even beyond that, though, there was a woman who killed her husband, who had wrote an article on how to kill your husband. White woman, I think, out west. And they had to find another way to find her guilty because the judge would not allow her article to be used in court. And fair is fair. And the constitutional rights that are promised to us in this republic are promised to us in difference of whatever our differences are. And all I'm holding us to task, and our court system to task to do, is to say simply, give us what is promised. And freedom of speech means freedom of speech from government using that as a bludgeon to make you or force you to comply or to deny you a right. And anytime government is using rap lyrics or any lyrics, and again, black people usually are affected by laws that are punitive, worst and first. Those boys and girls that are being tried for rap lyrics are merely a testing ground. If they're going to pull those lyrics off Facebook, how long before your local city council person, your mayor, your police chiefs, finds what you wrote on Facebook about them? And you're prosecuted. And you don't have, just like they don't have, the luxury of being able to have a record company pay for your defense attorneys. You don't have the luxury of being a landowner to take out a loan and do that. You're just going to be you're going to be in the dregs. You're going to be put under the prison. So freedom of speech is important for me, not only for people that I agree with, or people like me, which are artists, for people I vehemently disagree with that are not like me, that may not be artists. And I think that if we don't start to view it that way, if we don't, just like we think clean air and clean water is something that everyone deserves, if we don't start to see it that way, that freedom of speech is as important for my opposition as it is for my allies, then I think we put ourselves in peril of losing it.
Yeah, there is some movement to push back against the criminalization of rap lyrics. I believe California just passed a law that reformed the rules of evidence, so that places restrictions on
New York is doing something as well.
Yeah, there are other states, and you signed on to a letter that Fire also signed on to that was put out by the music industry about protecting black art. So there are some positive developments in that.
But we shouldn't have to be. It
No.
honestly should be, the Constitution is the Constitution, and we will not interfere with the rights that are promised, that are recognized by the Constitution, that are given us by God.
Yeah, eternal vigilance, right? That's the cost. I want to ask you about a conversation that's happening in the free speech community right now about cancel culture.
Yeah.
Right. So, on the one hand, you have people saying it's consequence, it's consequence culture. This is people using their free speech rights to push back against people who they disagree with or they think are offensive or hateful. On the other hand, you have other people saying that it's stifling art, it's stifling expression, it's preventing us from talking across lines of difference, it's vindictive, and it tries to get people to lose their jobs rather than change minds. And I know you're close, for example, with Dave Chappelle, and he talks about this frequently and experienced it a little bit at Netflix, for which Netflix stood up and reformed their internal policies and said, no, we don't deplatform art. So I was wondering how you think about that issue. And do you see it as a problem, or as just kind of free speech in action and all of its dirty permutations?
Well, free speech privately comes with consequences. It comes with people protesting. In that speech we were talking about, the Boston speech with Frederick Douglass, he brought abolitionists together. They were there to exercise free speech on the behalf of those people that were enslaved and people want to end slavery. And other people showed up to say, hey, we vehemently disagree. It turned violent. The police did nothing, right? We have an opportunity in this country to agree or disagree. But what should never happen is we use the government as a bludgeon, because then we turn into brown shirts in Italy during World War II. When you say, hey, you said something offensive, I want you to lose your job. Well, that may be the private consequence of me standing up or saying something. Colin Kaepernick has experienced that, right? Luther Campbell, they tried to get to experience that. It seems like it's a weird thing that the black guys always seem to be kind of the testing grounds for how it's going to go. But I warn cancel culture of this. Everyone gets a chance to get tied to the whipping post. Every single person is going to get an opportunity to wear a scarlet letter because you do something that offends someone else. And if you run and rally to cancel, kill, or use as a consequence others, it's usually going to come back on you in some way. But the problem is, greater than you yelling or getting me to lose my job, is when you try to change law to affect my God-given rights. I travel the world, not just the country. One of the scariest things I've seen happen in the last 10 years has been hate speech law happening, particularly in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. It's weird to me that a kingdom has basically colonized the earth. They aren't going to give any gold back to Africa. They don't want to give the statues back to Nigeria. Yet somehow they want to regulate hate speech. I don't want America to become the UK Part 2. I think that we've done a good enough job of being a junior long enough that we don't have to follow their antiquated laws and things, because that does not end racism in Europe. It has not ended racism in the UK. Many brothers and sisters I know there still experience racism. Many people who come from the Muslim countries, who would be Arab or Semitic people, still bear the brunt of the burden of racism there. So hate speech law has not changed anything. It just makes it easier to prosecute you for your thoughts, because your speech is usually a thought first. So now we're going into prosecuting people for the way they're thinking, or who they should choose to associate with, or watch, or retweet. That's a dangerous, dangerous slope. It's a slippery slope we're on. And I would warn people against that. In terms of privately, I don't like to see it, but there's not much I can do privately about it. But in terms of making things law, I'm vehemently against it. And I'm vehemently for people using free speech, even the people I disagree with. I am for no new gun laws, not an absolute one. I don't want to see one new gun law. But when the Tennessee 3 or the Tennessee 2 or whatever you choose to number them chose to take to that floor and exercise the freedom of speech to argue on the behalf of, then I hold no objection to that. I don't think they should have ever been taken from their offices using the law as a bludgeon. You know, the Speaker of the House in Tennessee uses the law as a bludgeon to punish a political opponent. I think that's evil. I think that's unwise. As you will see, within days, they came for him in his private life and asked that he be removed. Yeah. And I think as an American politician, as an American citizen, I think it's a very foolish road to travel by using the law to silence people. In terms of cancel culture, I would just warn people that if they come for you on Monday and no one says anything, they'll come for your friends on Tuesday. No one will say anything. They'll come for your enemies on Wednesday and Thursday, and no one will say anything. And eventually, everyone will be gone.
Fireworks a lot on college campuses, and one of the things that I've noticed about, I'm 33 years old, my generation and younger generations, is a skepticism of freedom of speech and a willingness or a desire to try and enlist those in power to police speech without a sort of understanding of how that's boomeranged and hit
usually doesn't
back
go
on them. Yeah, it usually doesn't go go very well. But it's something that if you look at older generations of civil libertarians in particular, they said, no, we don't want to give the government this power to pick and choose who gets to speak. But there seems to be this sense that some, especially in younger generations, there's more comfort with power exercising police authority for hate speech, for example, as you mentioned, or speech that some might find offensive on campus.
Yeah, you calling me nigger doesn't bother me because it has no power. Stokely Carmichael talks about that. You saying nigger and running and winning sheriff then gives you the power to hang me in the middle of the night. And I'm speaking just because someone ridiculously put up on Twitter today, there was some white politician who had essentially alluded to he wouldn't run for sheriff because he couldn't take black people down to the Mud River and hang them anymore, right? And they said, well, Mike and Charlemagne the God and somebody's going to defend that. I don't defend what he said. I defend his right to say it. Like my grandfather said, I'd like to know who my enemies are when I walk in a room. So he has every right to say that. But what would be scarier is if he could actually become sheriff.
Do something about it.
And what's even scarier than that is if you have the power to command the sheriff to come get me for something I thought or said. So as scary as a white man saying nigger can be, it gets scary if that white person can hold political power. And it gets scarier if that political power is one that can do what we saw with the Tennessee 3, actually tell people or to pull someone from job that could affect over 70,000 black people or help them in their district simply because I disagree with the way you said something you said. So I tell people that I see, as I go online, I see people who are maybe more conservative than other people on college campuses getting yelled at, screamed at, water thrown about them and things. Don't start to imitate the masters you're protesting. Don't become the people you hate, because great power requires great responsibility. And if you're powerful enough to start to lobby and leverage law to shush people, it won't be long before you'll be the person getting shushed.
Well, I think that's a great note to end on. Killer Mike, I appreciate you sitting down and talking with me.
I appreciate you.
We're looking forward to seeing your speech tonight.
I'm looking forward to giving it.
All right, thank you.
Love and respect.
All right.
Yes, sir.